Swati is the founder and CEO of Propel X, which is a phenomenal organization working with a variety of startups across the deep tech ecosystem and more. And I'd love to pass it off to you to continue with your keynote, maybe a few more words about your background in Propel X, and then we'll go from there. And if there are any questions, I'll let you know from the audience. So.
Sure. So, hi everyone. It's a pleasure to meet you all. It's a pleasure to be here at this Deep Tech Connect Summit. I'm sorry I'm not able to be there in person. It would have been lovely to see everyone. I can't even see your faces, so it's very hard to be responsive, but I will try. My name is Swati Chaturvedi. I am the co-founder and CEO of Propel X. Propel X is an online investment platform. We enable accredited investors to invest in startups. We also have our own Newton Fund, which is a venture capital fund, which invests in deep tech startups. So our focus, whole soul of Propel X, of Newton Fund, is deep technology startups. We actually started using the term way back in 2013 when it wasn't a global thing. At that time, I founded the MIT Angels Group. That was way back, like I said, in 2013. And we founded the group to focus on deep technology companies that are founded on breakthrough science, breakthrough technology, which find it really hard to raise financing in the earliest days, as some of you may have experienced, but go on to deliver great returns. So it is imperative that we find ways to finance these kinds of companies. We started the MIT Angels Group with a focus on deep tech companies. And then from that grew Propel X, the online investment platform, which really expands the reach of deep tech startups to accredited investors around the world. So today, we're going to be talking about how to navigate deep tech growth and deep tech fundraising. So let me just get started. I'm going to share my slides here. So we're going to be talking about growth and fundraising, and let's get started. So before we get to growth and fundraising, it is important to identify what are the key risks for deep technology startups, because growth and fundraising are really intertwined. Things that you do that are good for growth are also good for fundraising, because obviously they're eliminating the barriers to growth. So let's start with identifying what are the key risks to growth, and therefore also the key risks to fundraising. Then we'll talk about how to navigate growth and how to navigate fundraising. So let's get started. Deep tech startups. What are deep tech startups? This is coming on the last day of this summit, so it's kind of late. You guys are already in the deep tech ecosystem. You are deep tech startups, but because we want to identify the key risks, so I do want to go back to our definition once again. So this was an article I put out in 2015 on LinkedIn, one of the earliest, I think, if not the earliest, on what is deep technology. But we define deep technology startups as companies founded on either a scientific discovery or meaningful engineering innovation, which means we are bringing life science startups, which sometimes depend on discoveries, into the purview of deep technology. These are not internet companies, nor are they based on business model innovations, although business model innovations become important to growth. But that's not the foundation of these companies. You guys are building transformative companies that will change the face of the planet in coming decades. So this was where we started off. Because these are transformative companies, they're based on a lot of R&D. So a lot of research has gone into them, and there are these perceptions of risk, which we'll talk about. So what sectors do you operate in? It's all of these sectors, whether it's starting from aerospace, transportation, life sciences, industrial tech, energy and green tech, IT and communications, food and ag. And this is non-exhaustive. So there are many sectors, but the common theme is that all of these are hard technologies, tangible technologies. They're not software alone, although software becomes very important to them. However, given that they're hard tech, there is a key perceived risk that they are capital intensive. But are they really capital intensive? Let's look at a couple of examples. Life sciences companies perceived to be capital intensive because there's this large spending on R&D, followed by this high risk regulatory approval process. There's no revenues until you're approved. In other sectors, energy, green tech, industrial tech, there's a large spend on R&D once again, an ongoing spend on R&D. You could do POCs with strategic partners. You'd set up equipment to produce prototypes. And then there's this whole manufacturing setup, scale up, perceived to be capital intensive. In reality, though, deep tech startups do not use any more capital than, let's say, an internet startup. An example is Facebook. Facebook raised above $1 billion before they went public, right? It's just that deep tech startups raise the same amount of money, but they use it for different purposes. Deep tech startups use it for spending on equipment, on R&D. Internet startups use it for marketing. The key difference, however, is that an internet startup can start generating revenues much earlier. So when we say capital intensive, it really means that the time to revenue is very long. The time to first revenues is very long. So it's a long development cycle before any revenues begin to be realized. And that also gives rise to financing risk. What if you run out, of capital midway through the process and there's no revenues? So these two are the two important things which we need to understand. It's not capital intensive, is just another way of saying that there's a long time before first revenues are realized. If we can mitigate that key risk, time to revenue, via appropriate growth strategy, then you're also mitigating your time to fundraise effectively. Right, so that is the number one risk, is the key risk, how to mitigate time to revenue. And while that is difficult for deep tech startups, I want to share at least some strategies today whereby you could bring about at least some change. It's not going to be a kind of a silver bullet, but let's discuss this. So with that, let's talk about how to navigate growth, how to mitigate this key risk to your growth. So basically, I just have three things to say. Whatever you do, keep that in mind, that you're mitigating your time to first revenue, right? So there are three things. You have to build strategic relationships early, get the first customer as quickly as possible. I'll talk more about each of these. And tap alternative sources of capital to mitigate financing risk, including the public markets. More about that in a minute. So let's talk about what do we mean by build strategic relationships early. Well, for deep tech startups, for the most part, your customers are corporate. In some cases, your customers may be consumers, in which case you can have a direct-to-consumer strategy. That is a separate topic altogether. But what I would emphasize is start talking to large corporate partners early. One of the key issues that we see is startups wanting to stay stealth or to keep their invention close to their chest because it is so special. It is special. However, if large corporates had been wanting to do that, they would have done it, and they can still buy you out. So the idea is you should be talking to corporations, not worry about your inventions being copied. You need to get feedback, and you need to start doing that early. Work towards a joint development agreement or a proof of concept customer relationship even. So that is very, very important, and we can't emphasize that early. Not only does it confirm market need, it generates revenues. It mitigates your key risk. So that's very, very important. And you should build these relationships while you're in the lab. And let's talk about the next thing, which is get the first customer as early as possible. One of the problems that we find, through Propel X, through Newton Fund, we've closed 90 plus deals at this time. One of the key problems we find, and we've seen how startups are navigating their growth phases. And one of the key problems is that the target market is not properly identified, right? In some cases, and the reason for that is the origin of how a deep tech company starts. Typically, deep tech companies start in labs, in research labs at universities where you work with your professor to develop a new technology, the exact application of that may or may not be clear, right? And the way to clarify the application is to have a large corporate sponsor your research, is to have, and that helps you to explore target markets early while you're in the lab. If a large corporate is not sponsoring your research, then the question is the market is questionable, right? The way that it's one thing for people to say, "Oh, I'm super interested in it," and it's quite another thing when they put pen to paper and they write you a check and they say, "I'm going to sponsor this because this is something I need." That is the litmus test of whether or not there is a market. You need to be exploring target markets early while you're in the lab. You need to get close to a customer relationship while you're in the lab. If possible, get to a JDA while you're in the lab. And all this while, you're being sponsored by the government, right? Get SBIR grants, foundations, endowments, all those could sponsor your research while you're in the lab, and preferably a corporate as well. What that leads to is you need to incorporate your company as late as possible, as close to revenues as possible. And the reason for this is, remember, we are mitigating time to first revenue. Time from the day the company started or the day that you raised your first financing to the first revenues. So you need to start your company as late as possible. It also simplifies a lot many other things. You don't have to file stub taxes, and there is this perception of shelf life. You start your company too early. You've been in the works for 6-7 years before you go out to raise your financing. Believe me, in venture capital, there is this concept of shelf life. People are asking, okay, you've been around for so long, what have you done so far, and so on. So if you start your company as late as possible, as close to customer revenues as possible, not only are you mitigating the key risk, but you're also mitigating this perception of shelf life. And if you start your fundraise once you have a customer relationship, maybe you don't have a customer relationship, but there is a late stage conversation that mitigates that risk again, which is the time to first revenues. So again, what we are doing here is really talking about how to mitigate time to first revenue risk, right? And finally, as I said before, because there is a long time to first revenue, and because this is perceived to be capital intensive, therefore, you should be talking to all sources of capital, including all kinds of alternative sources, including public markets at a later stage, of course. But I wanted to highlight this because this was something we've been talking about for a long time. So venture capital firms are one source of capital, but there are other sources, whether they're SBIR programs, foundations grants, individual angels, angel groups, platforms like Propel X now. Please do explore all of these. There's venture lending. I mean, this list is non-exhaustive. There's all kinds of sources of capital today. And I did write about exploring the public markets early, way back in December 2016. At that time, what I had said was that all deep tech startups should be learning from some life science startups. And at that time, Juno Therapeutics had gone public, having done just their phase 1 clinical trial, and was valued very highly, over $2 billion. The point I wanted to make, you may not have completed all of your research, you may not have completed everything to bring something to market, and it's different for different sectors. But the point is, you need to start exploring all sources of capital early. And today, that is a reality with SPACs, whether you talk about QuantumScape that went public with no revenues, or there are many, many others. The point is, they got their research done and they explored alternative sources of capital to get their product to market. So again, we're talking about how to mitigate financing risk, which is part of how to mitigate time to revenue and so on. So with that, I'll transition to how to navigate fundraising. And I know that this is a little bit non-interactive right now, but I do want to leave us some time for questions. So there will be questions. Please hold them for now. But I do want to answer your questions. So let's talk about how do we navigate fundraising. Now, this is our sphere of expertise. Not only do we invest ourselves through Newton Fund, but we help startups fundraise through the Propel X platform. We work with thousands of angel groups who invest through the platform Propel X. And so we know a little bit about what makes a startup successful when it comes to fundraising. So let's look at that a little bit. Like I said, there's many sources of capital. The number one thing that people think of is venture capital firms. And the earlier you are in your development cycle, you're thinking, oh, I'm going to get, $50 million from a VC firm first go. In fact, I speak with such startups all the time where they're saying, oh, I need a total of $100 million. And I'm like, that is not how it works. That really is not how it works. The thing is that venture capital firms have their own mandates. They are also looking to mitigate their own risk. It is very unlikely, if you're a high-risk startup, that you will get a VC to back you unless you are a serial entrepreneur. That's the only time when you will find VCs backing you without you having completed or brought your product to market, some kind of commercialization in place already. So that is hard. Getting a VC firm to back you at the earliest stage without having any kind of customer traction, very, very hard. So get the customer traction first thing. Even then it is hard. Because if you look at the numbers, VCs regularly claim that they back 2% of companies that pitch them. All right. So that's a very small number. But if you look at the flip side, how many companies go public that were not backed by VCs? That number is pretty high. That number is high. So there are companies that have bootstrapped, that have explored alternative sources of capital, that bring themselves to commercialization and to growth, through growth, and become big all by themselves as well. Which is not to say that one source of capital is better than the other, but which is to say, you guys are doing great things. So just keep at it and explore these sources of capital. What I would like to talk about today, because that is our area of expertise, is how to raise money from angels and how to raise money from platforms. Before I go off, sometimes, like I said, like it's here in this footer, fundraising can be a long drawn and continuous affair till you get to growing revenues. Once you have the revenues and they're growing, people will come to back you. I mean, case in point, MailChimp and a bunch of others, right? GitHub and whatnot. So how to raise financing from angels? I had written a long thread on Twitter a few months back and then also put it on LinkedIn. So you might want to refer to that because that's a little bit more detailed. But here you are. I am here in person and you can hear it from the horse's mouth. How to raise financing from angels. Valuations, all important. Please keep them low. Angels are valuation sensitive. For seed round, your valuations should be in the range of $4 million or 4 to 5 max. Here I've written 4 to 6. That's liberal. If you have revenues, you're still raising a seed round. Very often the earliest revenues are non-recurring engineering revenues where you have a POC or similar. Maybe you could do 7 million, max 8 million. I mean, we don't see those, but that is the absolute ultimate or outside limit, on where you should be raising from angels. Start with your friends and family. That's a good place to start always. You will face some rejection and you'll get some practice on it. When you're looking for angels, you should identify angel groups in your area. Most regions have local angel groups. Try the Angel Capital Association for a list of groups. One of the things I will say is build a long list of prospective investors. So I want to share some examples here. So at Propel X, which is itself a startup. It's kind of like an investment bank, but we also have a venture capital fund. So we really are seeing the situation from all angles, right? We've been in the spot fundraising for ourselves. We've been in the spot fundraising for other companies as a kind of investment bank, and we've been in the spot investing in companies. So what I will say is that you need to have many, many, many conversations before you will find investors, right? And for on behalf of companies, we talk to many, many, many investors before we find substantial investment for them. So build a long list of prospective investors. You should assume that 7 to 9% of the people that you speak with will actually invest. So if you talk to 100 people, about 40% will actually respond, or you reach out to 100 people, 40% will respond. Eventually, 7 to 9% will invest. If you take 25K per investor, that's a very small amount of money. So you need to have a list of 100 plus prospective investors. Next, because this is a long list, please use a CRM tool. You can go as basic as Excel, but please do not keep it in your head, because then things will slip through the cracks. Not just that, using a CRM tool keeps you disciplined. So fundraising, like sales, is nothing but discipline and numbers and discipline. Have a long list, go after it. It takes 4 tries. So there's research on this. It takes 4 times you reaching out to people before they will respond to you. So don't think that, oh, they didn't respond, they don't like me, and I'm so sad. No, please keep at it. Have a very thick skin. Keep writing to people for at least 4 tries before you give up. So carrying on, again, lose all ego. Like I said, please don't take it personally. Any angel that you're pitching to is probably being pitched by many, many startups at all times. And that certainly is true for us. We know that. If you don't hear back from them, don't take it personally. It's just that it got lost in the email. Most likely that is the case. It got lost in the email. Maybe they forgot. Maybe you need to write a different opening line. Whatever it is, you need to not take it personally, lose your ego, keep trying, keep at it. Learn from every pitch. So every time you have a conversation, the 40% people who want to respond or who want to engage with you, they are your learning opportunity, right? Eventually, you know that 7 to 9% will invest, but every conversation you have really enlightens you. People ask you about your customers. People bring up all kinds of things that you had not expected or you had not thought about. It can influence your own operational strategy as well. So learn from every pitch. Every pitch is very, very important. Keep investment minimums low. This is especially important if you're early in your fundraising cycle, right? So what happens is fundraising is like this dominoes thing. You get one person down or some dollars in, then more dollars will come and more dollars will follow. And then it kind of snowballs from there, right? So it's very important to get the first dollars in. To get the first dollars in, you have to loosen your or relax your rules around how much you're going to accept, what is the minimum check size, etc. So keep your investment minimums low. We've seen startups take as little as $5,000 from people, not suggesting that that is ideal. But if you can get 3 or 4 people, 5 people coming in at $5,000 each, now you have your first 25K. You can go about saying 5 people have invested, or 10% of my round is filled, or whatever it is, that number that you get, you have some traction on your fundraising, right? The first investments will come from people around you, people who know you, who are investing in you rather than in your company. So if you keep the investment minimums low for them, it will help. And it will help build momentum, which is my next point. built that momentum. Like I said, it's like a dominoes, one falls, all of them fall. So you really need to build that momentum. It snowballs. Typically, if you're raising $1 million round, the hardest is the first 100K. It is the hardest. I've done it myself. I can tell you it's the hardest. After that, it's much easier. And the last 500,000 will come. So you'll spend 80% of your time doing the first, let's say 250K, and 20% of your time doing the remaining 750K. So it is like that. Build momentum and keep that going. Finally, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So it will take time. Be prepared for that. Just keep at it. It will happen. And then, like I said, I have written about this. You could refer to my post on LinkedIn, or it probably is in other places on Twitter as well. The other source of capital that we did want to consider was platforms. So at this time, platforms abound. In 2012, the Jobs Act was approved and it came into force and so on. So now there's crowdfunding platforms, there's accredited investor platforms, there's Propel X, which is a deep tech focused platform. There aren't other deep tech focused platforms to our knowledge, but certainly explore. We are not the only platform that is hosting, although our exclusive focus is deep tech because that's what we understand. But deep tech startups are on other platforms as well, and you must explore those, right? When you're thinking about which platform to go to, number one, please realize this, you don't have to be exclusive to anyone. You can be on all platforms at any given time, right? So what I'm giving you here is fundraising advice. What I would do if I were in your shoes. I would definitely explore most platforms. Some of the criteria that you do want to consider, because even fundraising on platforms can be time and effort intensive, right? So don't jump into it without talking to someone at the platform and understanding more on what the platform is about. So for example, you could ask the following question: how long does it take to complete a fundraise? Is it 1 month? Is it 3 months? Is it a year? How do you work? What is the average amount of fundraising on your platform for a given startup? How many investors will I get on my cap table, right? Am I going to get a crowd of investors? Am I going to get 5 investors? What should I expect? What are the investment minimums for each investor, right? So if you do go to crowdfunding platforms, the investment minimums are low, which means that you will get many investors on your cap table. But do ask them how it works and how they minimize investors on your cap table. What types of investors? So obviously, the ideal investors are those that help you in your growth process as well. People who are from your industry or who know a little bit about your industry, people that are maybe connected in your industries. So what kind of investors am I going to get? You should ask that. Whether or not they're deep tech focused, the investors, the platforms, these are things to consider for you. Ultimately, please realize platforms are like any other investor. Every investor is looking for a successful story, a successful outcome of their investment. Most platforms are curating to make sure that you're a legitimate investment. At least on Propel X, we care. We care that our investors benefit from these investments. We care that we do well by the startups as well, right? But we are extremely curated for that reason because we care. And it matters how you work with the people. So it is important that you get into the process early. Just like for any other investor, you start talking early, and maybe 6 months down the line, it will culminate in a relationship. Same way with a platform. You get into the queue early. Please know that like any other venture capital firm, platforms also have lots of startups that are applying to them. So it's important that you get into the queue, you talk to people, you offer information, keep us updated on your progress. It matters how you work with the people on the platform, right? That's very important. And then I want to share with you what succeeds on most platforms, and certainly what succeeds on Propel X, just speaking from experience there. If you have most of your round filled, well, then the last is easy. I already said that the first part is hard, the last part is easy, because everyone wants to be the last money in. While we try very hard, I mean, don't mistake that to say that you shouldn't get in touch with us early. Get in touch with us early, please. If we can, we will introduce you to lead investors and so on, right? But if you're on the platform, what is going to succeed is if you have much of the round filled, the rest will come really quickly. The rest can come really quickly. Your fundraising can be as short as a week if you're offering the last, whatever, 250K out of $1 million raise. Your fundraising can be as short as 2 weeks or similar. If you're in a later round, so a Series B, for example, there's a greater chance that, and it is somewhat filled, there's a greater chance that you will fundraise. Why? Because it's risk mitigated. So all investors are constantly looking at risk versus how much they're investing. What we have seen, the investors that write, let's say, a 15K check to a seed stage company will write a 150K check to a Series B company. It is like that. So I just want to put it out there. The fundraise can be rapid. It can be 4 to 6 weeks to fundraise. Let's say if you have 25% of your round remaining, and another 2 to 3 weeks, at least in Propel X, we are obligated to conduct due diligence, get all the monies into escrow. So we will herd the cats and get it in. But that is relatively rapid and no work on your part. So you can start focusing on your growth. But the point is, I wanted to highlight what succeeds on most platforms. What is successful is if you're already succeeding, right? And that is an irony, somewhat of an irony, but that is how it is. It is that the first 100K is the hardest and the remaining will come much easier. And it is no different for platforms. They are investors like all other investors. So with that, I will stop. We covered some areas of fundraising, of growth. I'm happy to take questions. And again, I wish I were there in person. It would have been nice to see your faces, but I'll stop there and I'll let Patrick navigate the questions.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. I've truly never seen a more transparent roadmap for angel investing, I don't think. And maybe there's a way we could share links to the articles that you've written. I can try to look into that for attendees. Well, we did get some questions come in. The first one is a little broad, but I think with your background and experience and how many founders you've seen and spoken with, this one is, what key deep tech sectors do you personally find the most exciting right now for current trends?
Within the sectors, I think there are specific areas. So I have always felt that personalized medicine is going to be important, whether it's specific gene therapies or specific delivery methods or others. So, and I know that there's a lot that has been done in genomics and so on. We are excited about proteomics going forward. I think that's of interest to us. Personally, I'm excited about space. I think we are very early in the development cycle, but I think 15 years down, it's going to be very important. It's going to be very important. It's very early in its development phase, so anyone that gets in now is going to benefit. But again, some of the startups are too early right now, in my view. It's very hard to find the market, like I said. I am very interested in, I think in the next 5 years, especially 4 years with this administration, clean tech is going to pick up, right? And so we're still waiting to see what the policies are going to be, but we're keeping an eye on it. So again, that is very broad, but within clean tech, I think, battery technologies continue. I mean, they're going public now, right, with no revenues, but that's great. But I think they continue to be important. They continue to be important, especially I'm hoping there'll be more renewable and distributed generation. So storage will continue to be important.
I agree. And obviously for this summit, we have the blue economy and aerospace and energy, which kind of tie in with what you just mentioned. So it all comes together. Here's a little bit of a more specific question about successfully kind of scaling up. And this one focuses in customer discovery. You did speak a little bit about customer identification. And this person wants to know if they don't have enough time to really conduct customer interviews, should they outsource it? What other aspects of an early stage startup should they look to outsource to third parties? Do you have any recommendations around doing that?
That's a great question. So my personal view is that customer discovery, especially early on, it's pretty central to the company. If you're sending out a survey, it's one thing to outsource. But if you're actually talking to people, please don't. Try not to, because customers will give you insights and you can pursue conversation down different tracks. So at least personally, I feel that I would not outsource this. This is something even I have customers today, people who are investing through Propel X startups. I talk to them all the time, regularly. I reach out to people. How was your experience? Let's say you just completed a deal. I do reach out to people. How was your experience? So my recommendation would be, please don't outsource customer discovery. That is the most important part. And there may be some people that disagree. Well, this is my perspective. But outsource everything else, right? So this is something actually I wrote about a long time back in Clean Technica, that you need to outsource to innovate. And I think life sciences companies have really set a good example. They do outsource everything from clinical research, there are CROs that are available and so on, to setting up the manufacturing processes, to regulatory strategy. They outsource a lot of things, and they act centrally as the coordinator. Obviously, they don't outsource the drug of whatever the key therapy discovery or the development of the medical device, if that's what they're doing. They outsource everything else. So I would say outsource everything else. So the obvious things are finance and whatever, HR. Well, there's no HR, but finance and accounting and so on should definitely be outsourced. But there are also lots of incubators and accelerators today that will enable you to use their equipment so that you don't have to buy heavy equipment. There are some things that are shared resources. You could use that, certainly. Some things you will have to, unfortunately, buy in-house just because that equipment is very specific to you. But there are unique ways of financing those kinds of things, sale leasebacks and whatnot.
Great. No, absolutely. I get that question all the time from startups that I speak to and mentor. And I definitely agree wholeheartedly with what you just said. Now we have about 3 minutes left, so we could do this question and see where we are on time. This is somebody who is actually based outside of the US and is curious about expansion in the US. Should they go after US investors? Where should they even begin if they're not physically present within the United States?
So yes, in the US, for the regulations, you can always solicit US investors if you do it correctly. So US investors can invest in international companies if they choose to do so. We have certainly enabled investments in international companies, but not knowing the US landscape will not be helpful to you, right? The ideal thing to do, and it's relatively easy to do, is to have one person here and create a parent co, which is registered in Delaware. You could do that, and you could roll your international company as a subsidiary under that. Just remember one thing: investors want to invest in the parent. They don't want to invest in a subsidiary. They want to benefit from all of your revenues or all of your profits. So one way to do it, of course, is to go solicit investors. I mean, we certainly do startups that are international, but when it's international, we are doing late stage only, Series B or later, and also if we have a partner. So we need the governance to be in place. But Series A or later, sometimes we will do. But if you don't have, if you don't have US presence, it is harder. So try to get a Delaware parent company. It's not difficult to set that up here.
Absolutely agree. And maybe for final comments, last piece of advice for an early stage seed ideation phase company. And then we could close out.
Yes. Well, like I said at the start, I am a big fan of deep tech startups. We have dedicated the past almost decade, I have dedicated to enabling deep tech startups succeed from seed stage. And now we're seeing some of our companies get close to exits, have exits. It is really fulfilling. I really wish you all the luck, because what you're building is not easy. It's not easy, and it can be transformative. Sometimes I see these companies building these foundational groundbreaking technologies, and we're here rooting for you. Don't give up. It's a long race. It's a marathon. It is not a sprint. So keep at it. Celebrate your successes. There'll be small ones along the way. Celebrate them. Keep at it. Remember, you're doing something that's very meaningful, that's groundbreaking, that's going to change the direction of humankind. So keep at it. And I wish you the greatest success and the greatest luck.